is not really an easy topic, as there's no real easy solutions. Anxiety affects not only individuals, but their family members, co-workers, and pretty much all of us in multiple ways. This last year taught us all how difficult anxiety can be, so we can now hear from our esteemed panel on how to clinical psychologist. He received his Ph.D. at the University of Southern California and has been practicing in the South Bay since 1976. He is the Director of Behavioral Health at Torrance Memorial and the founder and executive director of the Thelma McMillan Recovery Center at the hospital. He has expertise in alcohol and substance abuse and is certified by the American Psychological Association until 2019, when his practice merged with community psychiatry. Dr. Gelbart has been a consultant to the California Medical Board Diversion Program and the California State Lawyers Assistance Program. He has a wide experience in workplace violence and stress, managed care issues, chronic pain, and works with adolescents and adults in individual, couple, and group therapy. In addition, he treats anxiety, depressive disorders, and relationships. Welcome, Dr. Gelbart.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for taking your time and being here. I'm Dr. Gelbart, as Dr. Miller said. Really pleased to not only be here, but to make this presentation with Brittany Raduneka. You get meaningful and useful information. If you can walk away with one or two practical things that will help you deal with these issues, then I think we've done our job. So tonight's talk again is about anxiety and managing anxiety during difficult times. And prior to COVID, anxiety has been around for a long time, and anxiety is actually the most common mental health issue. However, the good news is, the bad news is it's the most common issue. The good news is it's also the most treatable of all mental health problems. Certainly the pandemic has changed anxiety. It's been a very strange year. In addition to the COVID-19, we've had civil unrest. We continue to have it. We've had election issues, social closures, natural disasters, and as this thing says, you know, the first rule of 2021 is no one talks about 2020. And even with light at the end of the tunnel, with vaccines and, you know, the ability to start opening up again, people are still suffering a great deal from anxiety. You know, we're actually facing a national health crisis. The highest rates of depression and suicidal thoughts, the highest rates of anxiety that we've had, probably as long as we've been measuring it. We have the highest rates of substance abuse. You know, the mental health practitioners in this community, as well as most communities, are just jam-packed with requests for helping people. The self-help lines are packed. And, you know, as I say, what we're concerned about is not only what we've been through in the last year, but, you know, how are people going to cope in the future? What kind of what we call post-traumatic stress is going to occur as a result of this? So it's no question that the pandemic is affecting our lives and will continue to do so. And it disrupts every part of our lives. There's a term which is up there, Coronaphobia, is a new terminology for, you know, obviously the fear of what people are dealing with in regards to the coronavirus. And I just saw today, if I can read this small print, literally in a publication today, the American Psychological Association came out with a new name for the experience we're having, and it's called post-pandemic trauma and stress experience. And aspects include fear for the future, extreme weariness, withdrawal and isolation, grief, and then it goes on to some of the things which we're going to talk about what to do in regards to that. But as I say, we've had a lot of stress, a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and the magnitude of what we've been through is sort of hard to fathom. Over 560,000 people have died, more than a combination of multiple wars that we've been through, the stress and trauma for families that have had major loss and illness and death, financial loss, job loss, and the long-term consequences are both for our adults, and many of you are parents out there and have children, and what are our children experiencing? They have loss of time with their friends, and time with friends is the most important thing for adolescents and teenagers. Anxious about being behind in school. They are anxious about missing on milestone events like proms and football games and graduations and all the things that they've been waiting for many years in their lives. The fear of the future is unknown. And I think there's a lot of anxiety because we have lost what I call transitional moments. When in the past normal, because we're going to soon talk about the new normal, but in the past normal, we would have this transition time. In other words, you'd get up in the morning, you would make your children breakfast, they'd go off to school, you'd get in the car, and you'd kind of put the radio on and have this moment to unwind and become, just kind of let your mind go. Then you'd go to work, and that's transitioning to another, and then you come home and transition. And all these moments where you'd have different transitional points in your life were actually healing. But now, well, again, we're coming out of it, but for the past year, with staying at home and being on lockdown and always being under the same roof, we've lost that opportunity. And our kids have lost that opportunity. It's been very hard on a lot of the teenagers I've worked with. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about anxiety. We're going to break it into three areas, really. One, I'll discuss a little bit about what is anxiety, what's it about, what does it look like, what are the sources, what causes it, and then most important, Brittany and I will be talking about what can we do? What are some of the coping mechanisms that we have for dealing with it? So, to start with, anxiety, fear, worry, nervous concern. It ranges from minimal to severe. And interestingly, anxiety can be positive. Anxiety can motivate people. I give a talk, I get anxious. But what it does is says, be prepared, practice, do the proper research. So some anxiety is actually very, very useful. But it also can be very crippling when it gets severe and debilitating and causes us to have difficulty in our day-to-day living. So looking at this slide up here, and it's just the wrong angle here for looking. But so anxiety is a normal reaction to stress and difficult times. It's triggered by specific stressors, has a beginning and an ending. It can be helpful, as I said. It lessens significantly and disappears generally, and it's relaxing often helps you feel better. Now, the fact that we all experience anxiety in one form or another is, again, on one hand good because it will help us understand what people go through. On the other hand, it's actually a negative because very often we cannot understand why someone else is feeling anxious about something when we take that as normal. And again, I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but it actually leads to a bit of judgment of others and, again, lack of understanding of why people go through what they go through. But as I said, when it's severe, it can be crippling. Whoops. There we go. Let me take a moment and just talk about conceptually what anxiety is in the way I conceive it and put it together. So there are three components. There are stressors, there are the way we think about the stressors, our perception, and then there's our physiological reaction. So for example, a stressor is what happens out in the world. Let's say, for example, giving a talk is a stressful event. In fact, speaking publicly is one of the most common stressful and anxiety-producing events there are. So that's the external stressor. I kind of laugh. In a former life, I was a junior high school English teacher, and one of the, I don't know if maybe it's a sick sense of humor, but I remember how frightened and anxious all the kids would be when they had to get up in front of the class and give their speech. And anyway, so let's say giving a talk is difficult. That's the external stressor. And then my thinking goes in. The next step is I think about it and I say, well, I'm afraid people won't like me. I'm going to stumble. My voice won't be right. I won't know what I'm saying. I'm going to black out. And that's my thinking that goes on about the stressor. And then the third piece is my body reacts. My heart races. I get sweaty underarms. I get a headache. I get my muscles tense. And then I begin seeing what happens to my body, and I start thinking again. So it's this vicious cycle. And the interesting thing is we can make an intervention in that cycle at any point. So for example, I could, if the stressor is difficult, I could say, I'm not giving the talk, or I'm going to go home. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. But I can do that, and having learned to do that is helped. Or I can change the way I think. I can change my perception, which is really going to be the core of what I'm going to speak about in the next few minutes. Or we can learn how to control certain parts of our body, and I know Brittany's going to talk a great deal about mind over body and how to relax yourself and so on. So you can make an intervention in any of these three areas. These are some of the symptoms of anxiety. I'll just run through a few of them. So physical, as I said, there's heart pounding, flushing, shortness of breath, dizziness, sweating, headaches, dry mouth. There are psychological symptoms, which include excessive worry, irritability, impatience, feeling on edge, fatigue. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them. And behavioral, which I'm going to explain what some of those behavioral symptoms of anxiety are, but include obsessive compulsive behavior and phobic behavior and avoidance of situations. So those are some of the basic symptoms of anxiety. And let's dig a little deeper into them. So as I said, there's stressors, thoughts, and what I'm going to call what-if syndrome, which I'm going to explain in a moment. And then there are these physical reactions. Interestingly, with COVID, one reason we're experiencing so much anxiety is the pandemic has taken away our normal coping mechanisms. So the things we normally do to deal with anxiety, like seeing friends and family, going to the gym, going to theaters, taking vacations, those things are gone to us, or have left. Again, coming back, thank goodness, but as a result of that, the anxiety has certainly increased. So let's look first at this fight or flight response, which is a big part of the anxiety phenomenon. So fight or flight means, it's a biological reaction to stress, to a stressor. And interestingly, it's a survival mechanism. What that means, as you see in this cartoon, in the old days, or the ancient times, or prehistoric times, not ancient times, the caveman would see a tiger. He'd make a quick decision in his mind, am I going to fight or am I going to run? And if he ran away, first of all, his body would have physical response to that. And it was, again, the purpose of the physical response was survival mechanism. So the heart would pump faster, so it would put blood into the body quicker. His hands and feet would get cold because the blood would rush more to the core. There's adrenaline that's released. So there's an entire survival mechanism for dealing with the stressor. And he runs away, and the tiger chases him, and he runs up a tree. Tiger goes away, and now he's okay. So that was the normal fight or flight response. The problem that has occurred and why anxiety is so prevalent is as our brains developed and as we got this higher functioning brain, one of the things we now can do is we can create our own anxiety. And I'll give an example that we've all had. You're driving in your car, police car behind you turns their light on and starts whirring their flashing lights, and you grip the steering wheel and you say, oh my gosh, and your mind starts going. You start thinking, they're going to pull me over, I'm going to get a ticket, it's my second ticket, I'm going to lose my insurance, what if I lose my insurance, I'm going to get to work. We go into this what-if syndrome, which I'm going to explain in a moment. And our body does this fight or flight response. It tenses, it heartbeats, and we go through this. Now the policeman passes us and goes and chases the person in front of you. And you go, ah. But in the meantime, your anxiety level has risen. You have created anxiety for yourself. And we do this, believe it or not, all day. All day we're creating these scenarios. So we have the ability, unfortunately, through this catastrophizing to create our own negative thinking. So let's take a look at the various forms of anxiety, the main types. So first is generalized anxiety, which is worrying constantly about many things, catastrophizing, and having these physical symptoms that I just mentioned. And here's some of the symptoms of generalized anxiety. And I'll go through them: restlessness, fatigue, excessive anxiety and worry, increased muscle aches and soreness, impaired concentration, irritability, difficulty sleeping. So there's this general sense of dread and anxiety. And again, remember, anxiety lives on a continuum. So some people have minimal and mild anxiety, and you can pretty much cope with that and find some ways to just work through it and power through it. And then on that continuum, if it turns to significant or severe anxiety, you're going to have trouble functioning and doing your day-to-day activities. And that's where some help is often needed. I think it's important just for a moment to look at the risk factors of not only generalized anxiety, but anxiety in general. And they include social influences, the brain chemistry, family background, and genetics plays an important part in anxiety, believe it or not. Often when a child comes in and is suffering from anxiety into therapy, I always ask, who in your family has anxiety? And almost routinely, somebody in their family has experienced anxiety and has, whether it's genetically and or environmentally, has transferred that to the child. You can assume, if you have a person with a lot of anxiety, when your child is walking down the street, and you're always going to be overly worried that something's going to happen to them, and so you're going to communicate that to them, and then they're going to begin picking that up. So it is a combination of genetic and environmental. Another form of anxiety is obsessive compulsive disorder. An obsessive compulsive disorder, the obsession part means unwanted thoughts, and the compulsive part of that is behaviors. So the thinking may be fear of germs, fear of making sure people want to make sure their doors are closed, that they shut the gas off. Some people have something in their mind that tells them they have to have a certain counting that they do in their world. A lot of the obsessive compulsive behaviors you would never know. A good friend of mine counts to 11 about everything. He keeps looking around. You'd never know just talking to him, but he's counting until he hits 11, and then he feels for a moment relieved. So obsessive compulsive is, sometimes it sounds, so you wash your hands a lot, but we have people who wash their hands so much, for example, because they're afraid of germs, that they are rubbing their hands where they're rubbing the skin off their hands practically. So obsessive compulsive, again, disorder, back on this continuum, can be very serious. And this is the cycle, basically. You have anxiety, and then you have a compulsion to do something about the anxiety, and then you do that compulsive behavior, and your anxiety is relieved for a moment, which sounds like a good thing, but what it really does is it strengthens that problem, and once again you have the obsession. So it's this vicious cycle that goes on. Another common form of anxiety, which I'm sure you've all heard of, are phobias. And phobias are intense fear of a situation. And there's something really interesting. I mean, it could be heights, it could be open spaces. People are afraid of spiders, they're afraid of dogs. We have now the term, which is on here, Trypanophobia, which is a fear of needles. A lot of people have difficulty with the vaccination because they don't want to get a needle in their arm. So phobias are a severe problem, and one of the problems with phobias is people tend to judge other people's phobias. So if somebody's afraid of heights, we just say, just get in the elevator. Don't worry about it. We can't understand why they're thinking about it differently than we are. Social anxiety is little more than shyness. It's fear of being around people, especially children and adults with social anxiety don't go places. They limit their social activities. So as I say, it's a lot more severe than just social shyness. And then the final one that I'm going to touch is on panic attacks, which is probably the most difficult to take of all the anxieties. And it's the most disabling. It's a feeling of sudden terror, and then we begin to avoid situations. For example, and it's the same cycle that I mentioned a moment ago. So if you have a phobia, a panic attack when you go over a bridge, for example, then you will not, next time you come to a bridge, you'll find some other way around, and you go, I feel better. Unfortunately, what that has done is strengthen your fear and your phobia about going over the bridge. So, what's the most common thread about what I've talked about? The most common thread, at least, is that our thinking is what creates our feelings, and our feelings are always correct based on our thinking. But one of the great things about working with how to get through an anxiety situation is if we change how we think, we can change how we feel. And that's what, as therapists and psychologists, we spend a good deal of time helping people and teaching people to change how you think. And it's really sort of like looking at the glass half full versus the glass half empty. If you see the glass as half full, you're going to feel generally good. If you see the glass as half empty, it'll be a negative kind of feeling. But the great thing about that is the water in the glass never has to change. It's just how you perceive it that can be different. And when we work with people about changing their thinking, we don't try to make a rainy day into a sunny day. So what we're really dealing with is what's called rational or irrational thinking. And this is a common term in working with anxiety and coined 50 years ago, rational emotive therapy by, I think it was Aaron Beck. But the point is, I think it's a terrible terminology when you tell somebody they have irrational thinking. But anyway, that's the common thinking. And what irrational thinking is, generally all or none, black or white thinking. When we tell ourselves what we should be doing, if things are right or wrong, it's this solid way of thinking, and that brings a lot of anxiety. So what we want to try to have people do is learn how to think rationally. And here's some examples. Let me read this, please. Rational beliefs are self-healing. They are based on the belief people can follow to live healthy and satisfying lives. They are based on what is most likely to work. People who keep following these principles are more likely to achieve their goals. And irrational beliefs are self-harming. They're based on beliefs that people may have about how the world should be. They contain unrealistic expectations and are often most unlikely to work. People who keep following these principles are more likely to live frustrating lives. So again, whenever we hear people speak about I should, I always, I have to, I must, we can begin understanding that they're probably going down this road of irrational thinking. And what we have to tell them, and if they're experiencing anxiety around it, we have to tell them to stop, literally. We have thought stopping, which I believe is the next slide over here. And we ask people to stop. I'm cutting through this real quickly. Take a deep breath. Think about the irrational thought. Turn it into a rational thought, and then move on. And again, that sounds simplistic, and there's a process to doing that. But just so you have an understanding, that's basically what we want people to do, is learn how to change their irrational, all or none thinking to rational thinking. And I liken it to like diluting their thinking, taking the way in which they're thinking and just looking for the gray in life rather than the black or white. And what happens when people think that way, their anxiety starts going down. I'm going to skip that thing. I do want to talk another part of that, and I work a lot with people. I ask people to change one thing in their thinking. People who have anxiety are often in the what if or catastrophizing mode of thinking. And so What if means somebody saying, well, what if this happens? What if I lose my job? Well, if I lose my job, what if I lose my house? Well, if I lose my house, what if my family leaves me? Well, what if my family leaves me? What am I going to do? And they begin going down this road of the what ifs, and I tell them, take a breath, like I said before, thought stopping, calm down, and say, what is? And what is means, what is happening? Because what is allows you to deal with the present and deal with things that you have control over. What if spins you out of control and brings you to anxiety? So again, this is just a flavor for how we try to work with someone's thought process and thinking to change this perception. And when we can do that, the anxiety actually changes. And it comes down to another, as a last thing is, helping people control the things they can control and let go of things they have no control. People who are experiencing anxiety are generally struggling with things they have no control over. And they're trying to control things they have no control over. So if we can ask again, somebody say, stop, take a breath, what is, in other words, what are you what's going on now, and what part of this situation do you have control over? And generally, that kind of calms them down. Now, 2 minutes later, they may feel anxious again, and you have to go through the whole process once again. But over time, that begins to have an impact on this anxiety that somebody may be feeling. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brittany, and she's going to provide some techniques and ways in which to deal with much of this anxiety. But first, I believe Dr. Miller is going to introduce her. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Brittany Raduneka, a South Bay native. Brittany is grateful for the opportunity to serve her local community as a psychosocial at Del Amo Hospital, Miller Women and Children's Hospitals, and the Todd Cancer Society at Todd Cancer Institute at Long Beach Memorial. Brittany is passionate about integrating mental wellness into traditional healthcare settings and enjoys supporting patients, families, and healthcare workers alike. Brittany's graduated from UCLA with a master's degree in social work and obtained her BA in psychology and creative writing from the University of Arizona. In her free time, Brittany enjoys practicing yoga, hiking local trails, family dinners, and going to the local farmers markets. Brittany is a yoga teacher and continually seeks trainings in mindfulness, self-compassion, and self-care. And I'm going to just interject here. I'm really looking forward to more talking here because Dr. Gelbart mentioned that with dealing with last year, we weren't able to do the things that we would normally do to cope. And I kind of started to appreciate how important mindfulness is. That was the only way to try to escape what I couldn't escape. And so that's what we're learning about now, and Brittany's going to talk to us more about as well.
Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in tonight and for taking a moment for yourselves. That's what tonight is really all about, so you're already on the right track. I think that one of the biggest parts of dealing with mental health and self-care, wellness overall, is to cultivate that sense of mindfulness, of recognizing when we need to tune in, when we need to check in with ourselves. And so today I will be guiding you through a few mindfulness, meditation, and self-compassion exercises to help you hopefully wind down for your evening. And maybe you'll take a few little tidbits here and there home. It's always fascinating to see what sticks with people a couple days later, but you may just enjoy accessing the present moment in a new way. And I'll also be holding you along the way, providing education. So if the word meditation or mindfulness scares you, please set that aside. All right, so this is my little context of where we are right now. Piggybacking off of Dr. Gelbart's presentation, the term anxiety is not only one of the most, obvious distressing words out there, but also it's one of the most common things we are hearing more and more these days. And I think one shift I'm noticing during the pandemic, actually, though, is we are talking more about these topics. We're having this presentation. And so I think it's amazing that we're offering, this skill set for our community to learn how to manage mental health. So anyways, I kind of put together this little list of what's going on right now. I love that term Dr. Gelbart mentioned. I'm totally going to botch it, but it was post-pandemic stress disorder. I know it has a fancier name, but yes, we are in the wake and the aftermath of much, and also the in-between right now of what's to come. It's hard to know how to move forward when there's still unknown in the future and after all that's happened. So I'm going to offer ways to help us find the present and access the present moment to hopefully open up a few options to let us know there are choices in the matter. So yeah, anniversaries of any kind stir up anxiety for people. We're just past the 1-year anniversary of COVID being declared a pandemic. In the wake of the surges in 2021, we thought it was going to stay in 2020 magically and at the end of New Year's Eve, but we dealt with that early 2021. The feelings about vaccinations, businesses are reopening, so the world is starting to reopen, but how do we actually fully move forward? So I love this quote by Morgan Harper Nichols: "Let the present moment surprise you." When people are in a state of anxiety, oftentimes their minds are going to the future. Some depression and grief tends to pull us backward. But when we find access to the present moment, that is really what we have, we learn that we can be surprised by what comes up for us. I actually practiced this skill with a patient earlier this week, and it was so fascinating because his mind was going one way with what his concern was, and we did like Dr. Gelbart said, stop. let's just breathe for a moment here, and it went in a completely different direction. I found that even the content shifted when we breathed. So we're going to be talking about mindfulness, grounding skills, which is bringing our anxiety down, self-compassion, trust, and hope. So you may have heard this quote before: "You can't stop the waves, but you can definitely learn how to surf," especially in the South Bay. So this quote is cited in a chapter from the book "Wherever You Go, There You Are" by Jon Kabat-Zinn, an incredible and masterful mindfulness meditation teacher. And he talks about the fact that, the waves aren't going to stop, stress is never going to go away. But how do we hop on the surfboard and glide as opposed to resisting? How do we find options and even, dare I say, growth in the process as opposed to just kind of trying to survive and to keep our head above water? So these are just a few little quotes about finding choices. Helen Keller: "We betray ourselves into smallness when we think the little choices of each day are trivial. The little choices of each moment are actually quite important." So mindfulness essentially means becoming aware. It's awareness. It's waking up to the present moment on purpose. This quote from The Greater Good, Berkeley, describes that there are many different things we can become mindful of. We can become mindful of our thoughts, our feelings, our bodily sensations. You could be mindful of eating a grape. You could become mindful of walking, of doing anything. So with that, I've talked enough, and I am going to invite you to join me in an exercise. So wherever you are, I'm obviously standing, but if you're sitting in your home or lying on a bed or on the couch, wherever you are, I invite you to just set aside your phones, set aside whatever is in your hands, Turn off that computer. I'm not the computer. Turn off whatever. Please don't turn off your computer. Turn off whatever distractions you have. Stop checking your email. That's what I meant to say. And we're just going to take a moment to settle in. Notice your inhales and exhales. Taking a big breath in your nose and out your mouth. And now I just invite you to come into a comfortable, a relaxed, yet alert posture. You may start to notice what parts of you are touching the ground or your chair. So, okay, my feet are touching the floor for myself. Your sit bones and your back may be on the chair. And just start to feel the connections of yourself to whatever surface you are connecting with. Your eyes may be gently opened or closed, whatever feels most safe and comfortable to you right now. So with your eyes at a gentle gaze or closed, I invite you to tune your attention inward. We're just going to take a quick little scan of what's going on in our body. So starting to notice any areas of tension. You may observe in your shoulders, your neck, your jaw. Just taking a quick overview, a scan. And coming back to your breath. If you get distracted or lost in story. And now simply observing any parts of you that feel okay. Does your stomach feel okay today? Do the corners of your eyes, are they smiling? Are the soles of your feet doing okay? Your palms, whatever it may be, your heart. Continuing to send breath now to wherever you feel maybe a little bit tight, tense, or need a little extra attention. Simply notice. Again, anchoring in the breath if you find your mind wandering. Knowing it's normal for the mind to wander, and we do have the ability to come right back. Taking a moment to note how your body feels after taking a moment to go inside. And now taking a big inhale and an exhale. Maybe shaking your hands, wiggling your toes, coming back fully into the room. So that's just one way to kind of develop full body presence into coming inside and knowing that we do have choices, we do have control over our nervous system. This next exercise will allow you to come out of what Dr. Gelbart described, the fight-flight mode. So when we are able to identify and use our senses to identify what we can see, what we're hearing, to come more fully into the present moment, it tends to help us come out of that paralyzing state of anxiety, which can make us feel very stuck. Our worlds can become very small. So we're going to start with another exercise where we're going to start practicing this sight. So I invite you to get back into a new posture, and we're just going to start looking around the room. Moving your neck in all directions, up and down, side and side, and slowly allow your neck, your head to unwind. So right now I'm noticing something that is green, blue, purple, turquoise, a light, camera, and I'm looking down to see something close and away, to see something far away. And the actual act of moving your head in all of these directions is incredibly helpful. It's a somatic technique to help you get out of that paralyzing reptilian part of your brain, which is kind of that archaic response that Dr. Gelbart was explaining, that threat response. So simply by moving our head around, we can start to create and reduce some tension. You can do the same thing with hearing, not quite moving your neck, but you can give a shot by noticing what you hear that's far away and what's a little closer. So I'll let you do that one on your own. We could go through all of these, but hopefully you're starting to notice yourself unwind. And if you're getting tired, maybe part of it is because your body's is down-regulating and you actually are tired, so that's normal. This next exercise is called box breathing. It's also referred to as Navy SEALs breathing because it was taught to the Navy SEALs to help keep them calm. So this is usually one that people tend to resonate with. So again, we're gonna get you calm one more time. So settle into your chair, maybe move around if you need to kind of wake up a little bit more. You don't need to come too awake, but just alert. So I'm gonna guide you through breathing in for 4 counts, holding your breath at the top for 4 counts, breathing out for 4 counts, and holding at 4 counts. So it's like a box, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. If that's too much or too little, feel free to adjust. So I invite you to start with me. You can breathe in through your nose, and you can exhale either through the nose or the mouth, so you could play around with that. All right, so on an inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath for 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale out your mouth for 4, 3, 2, 1. Holding 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding the breath for 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold that breath for 1, 2, 3, 4. Last round. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding your breath for 4, 3, 2, 1. Now one big exhale, sighing. Inhale and exhale. So that technique helps us to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is like the pause button on our stress response. All right, so a topic that I'm very excited to present about, self-compassion. This is another way of helping us not only relax, but to relate to ourselves to a healthy way. So self-compassion has been around for a long time, and it's recently been heavily studied by Dr. Kristen Neff at University of Texas in Austin. She finally put words to what's been going on for meditators for a very long time. So self-compassion is essentially learning how to relate to ourselves with the same love, care, and compassion that we would a good friend. So now that you have the awareness to be able to be aware of your breath, your body, your thoughts, that is what mindfulness is. So the 3 components of self-compassion are becoming aware, becoming mindful. When we become mindful of what's going on, that there's distress being stirred up for us, or any tension, we're being triggered, how we choose to respond to that is the next step. So we could respond with kindness and compassion. So you respond with the same kindness and compassion that you would a good friend. A lot of times we're really good at extending love to others, and we kind of forget about doing the same for ourselves. So actually the self-critical voice causes a lot of anxiety if we're on that topic, because it's both the attacked and the attacker. The third part of self-compassion is common humanity, realizing that we are all in this together. So just to review, self-compassion, becoming aware. This is stressful. This is hard. COVID is hard. There's a lot going on right now. Kindness. We're confronting many situations right now. No one's ever experienced this before. This is brand new. Let's be nice to ourselves about it. Let's cut ourselves some slack. Common humanity means, well, the one thing I know is that we're not alone in this. We're definitely all in this together, and everybody may have different ways that they're reacting to different stressors. They may have different stress in their lives, but this is this is kind of the thing in common right now with everybody. So I will get to that, but this girl I think is awesome because she kind of reminds me of our inner child that needs a little hug. It's like we just need love, right now, and we all just need to be really kind to and gentle on ourselves. So especially when you're noticing that you're feeling anxious, so we practiced, again, mindfulness. Dr. Gelbart explained what anxiety looks like. Next time when you notice that you're feeling anxious, I am going to propose another technique, which is placing your hand on your heart. So maybe where you are right now, you can just try and place your hand on your heart and see what that feels like. If that doesn't feel safe or it's triggering for whatever reason or inaccessible, please find another soothing posture for you. But simply being able to feel that connection to our body and to that energy center, which is the center of compassion and love, tends to allow ourselves to feel a little bit more nurtured. And so if you did one last exercise here, putting our hand on our heart compassionately, I invite you to either have your eyes open or closed and tell yourself, may I be well. May I be safe. May I rest in well-being. And may I experience love. May I be well. May I be safe. May I experience love and joy. So that is another technique you can come to if you feel activated. You can, especially if you notice you're starting to become self-critical, is you could put your hand on your heart or your arms or give yourself a hug. It actually activates the mammalian response, the mammal response, because we are not, we are evolved animal. We're evolved beings, and mammals do have that care response in their body, which can help to down-regulate anxiety. So it's kind of like, you think about a young child goes to their parent or their caregiver, and that's, what makes them feel better. Human connection is so essential, and realizing that we can give a lot of that to ourselves. So with self-compassion, Dr. Kristen Neff explains the yin and the yang side of self-compassion. So the yin is what we just did, the comforting, the soothing, the validating, like, oh, this is hard, but you'll be okay. You've gotten through hard things before. You're awesome. The yang side is kind of that motivating, what she refers to as the mama bear. She's like, protecting your time, protecting your own, protecting your family, providing, motivating. So I kind of see it as like, when I'm having a moment of when I'm checking in with myself, having a mindful moment, I'm like, what do I need right now? I'm being honest with myself. So there's the mindfulness of checking in. There's also the being honest with, like, okay, finding your intuition and then following through with it. So I'm like, do I just need to rest and soothe? And, it's been a hard day at the hospital. Let me unwind, take, a salt bath or something. Or do I need to get out there? Do I need to go for a run? Do I need to find a way to engage? Do I need to motivate myself to start something new? So I think a big part of anxiety too, and which mindfulness can help with, is cultivating the quality of trust. So be strong then and enter into your own body. There you have a solid place for your feet. So when you enter into this place of your body with mindfulness, with mindful awareness, you can find that there is a part of you that is stable within your core. Although just like the waves that we can learn how to ride, there is a stable part beneath it all. And having trust that we will ultimately have the tools inside of ourselves to be able to deal with whatever the situation is can hopefully bring you a little bit of peace. So I think, mindfulness is just one technique we could use. Obviously, we talked about it for a long time. I think creating routine is also very important. So I named a bunch of different techniques that you can do to help with your routine. Structure is a big one. I know that Dr. Gelbart mentioned missing those transitions in our life. It's just kind of all a blur. So it's like, how do we create structure? Sleep hygiene is kind of going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, creating a wind down process. Find a way to find gratitude, maybe through journaling, intention setting, prayer, reflection. I think it's very important to realize that it's okay to make goals for ourselves for the future too. Maybe this could be a good pause in the in-between to find time for reflection and to realize moving forward what we want to do with this weird year. It's brought up a lot. So it's kind of like what values have come up for us, what's come forward. How are we going to choose to create our new normal intentionally, to realize we have choices and options in that process. We have autonomy. With that, maybe you're going to start new patterns of eating more colorful foods, finding more movement, time in nature, less screen time after the talk, taking walks to breaks to walk, etc. I say savor your coffee and to not just take it like a vitamin, right? You have to find ways of, again, being mindful wherever you can. So I invite you, if you're still awake after doing those mindfulness exercises, I'm sure you're getting sleepy, hopefully not too sleepy, to think about what you can add to your self-care action plan. What are you going to take away from today, from Dr. Gelbart's information about restructuring your outlook and your thoughts and the autonomy you have in many of those skills? So what are you going to take away from today's talk on mindfulness and self-care? What do you want to add to your routine? So I invite you to drop any comments in the chat box if you have any, and maybe we could write those down for fun for later, or maybe just to help you commit. I wanted to close with this poem from Morgan Harper Nichols, again, from the book All Along You Were Blooming, to provide some hope. Light still fills the sky, and though your heart gets heavy and your eyes have struggled to find the stars above the streetlights, you are free to believe light is still pouring in, above, around, beneath, within. So I hope that you're able to find trust and hope and tools to learn how to manage anxiety moving forward. Thank you.
All right, so we've got to hear our panel speak. Now we are going to have question and answer time. Some of the questions have already been submitted, and so we're going to get started on those, but please feel free to add questions to the chat room, and we will address these as we proceed. So the first question, I have a 15-year-old child. He's going back to school next week and is really nervous and has a lot of anxiety. Somebody took my question away. It has a lot of anxiety about being around things and people. When he found out that he's starting school, he has a hard time now going to sleep.
I'll start. That's, first off, it's extremely common. When schools began to reopen, the first thought was, this is great, this is wonderful. But about 40% of kids are experiencing some anxiety about what we call reentry. And the first thing to remember is that's normal. It's, as I said earlier, there's this continuum of anxiety, and mild anxiety and normal anxiety is not going to necessarily interfere with that child's life. And the best thing you can do with he or she is accept it, don't judge it, don't tell them that they shouldn't feel that way. And basically, whenever I work with parents and kids, my mantra is talk so they will listen, and listen so they will talk. And so it's really important to hear them and recognize that this is an incredibly difficult year for them. It has been. And some of them don't want to go back to school. I'm amazed at the large percentage of parents that I've worked with whose kids do not want to go back, at least at this point. And after you've talked to them about their thinking and how they're feeling, maybe they need to wait, and it's okay. It's okay to accept how they feel. But I guess the main thing is to not judge what they're going through, but listen to them, and then try to have some dialogue.
How do I know if I have anxiety?
That's a very good question. I hope that you were able to, I'm sure for a lot of people, they may be asking themselves questions right now, or hopefully not diagnosing themselves too much, but also noticing within themselves and within their family members. I think Dr. Gelbart did a pretty awesome job of giving an explanation of what anxiety looks like. I think that if you are starting, for me, what I tell patients is when the anxiety or is becoming, is interfering with your daily life, you're unable to carry out activities that you usually are able to enjoy. It's interfering with your relationships. I guess that's not only what anxiety is, but I think it's when to realize that it definitely needs some help. I'm sure Dr. Gelbart could elaborate probably a little bit more on some of that, but I think that what's important to know is that there is help out there, and if your worries, if your mind, if your behaviors are starting to get in the way of you living the life that you want to live, I think that anxiety is notable enough to want to seek support around.
I think Brittany's exactly correct. And the only thing I want to add is to make sure you understand there's a difference between experiencing anxiety and having an anxiety disorder.
Right.
And experiencing anxiety is something not only normal, and sometimes it's very appropriate. Sometimes I'm actually, when I'm working with somebody, more concerned if they're not anxious. Okay, if they're not having the normal anxious reaction to an extreme stressor in their life, then I feel that they're not paying attention or burying their feelings. But again, that's different than an anxiety disorder, which, as Brittany said, is going to disable you and interfere with your day-to-day functioning. And at that point, then you have to do a little bit more work to stop it, and sometimes get some form of professional help.
I was told there are various types of anxiety. Is this a myth or fact?
Well, I think I covered some of them. If what we mean by types are that anxiety takes a variety of forms that we label based on the symptoms, then there are a variety of types of anxiety. As I said, there's generalized anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, phobias, panic attacks, post-traumatic stress is a form of anxiety. So there are various based on one's symptoms, we can determine we have a name for that type of anxiety. But the underlying causes are often pretty similar. So the treatment is also often very similar. But yes, there are different types of anxiety.
I think this is an interesting question. Who is at risk for anxiety? And I guess my sequel to that is, are there some people that don't have anxiety?
I can tell you that even the the longest meditators in the world, I'm sure, still deal with a bit of anxiety. I think it's actually a misnomer to think that, like Dr. Gelbart said, there is a level of stress and anxiety that is just going to happen. It's part of the way we're programmed, and that when we're reacting to certain events, I think that it's absolutely, it's just how we ride that wave and learn to deal with it. I think that there's different degrees and different ways anxiety can manifest. It's when it starts to create problems and disruptions. I think that the problem that I see a lot for people that deal with anxiety, I briefly mentioned, but is a lot of times their world becomes very small because of some of the fears and the thoughts. It's almost kind of like that fight, flight, freeze response. So I think that it's helpful to just know that there are many options if you are dealing with a lot of anxiety, but to be honest, I think that it's more so how we deal with it than the fact that it exists or not.
And I'll add to that, our stressors, or the stressors in our lives, cause us to feel anxiety. And that's, as I said, perfectly natural and normal. Our thinking about those events can lead to severe anxiety or anxiety disorders. So when we take those things that happen to us and we begin going down the roads that we've talked about of catastrophizing and then becoming physically anxious and then getting into these cycles, then we're turning those stressors and our normal anxiety into a kind of created severe issue.
And so I'm going to put you to the task here that the next question is, how do you deal with financial stress? So maybe you can use what you've just said to help, because that's something we all deal with.
Well, I'll start by saying, I'm chuckling for two reasons. I'm going to answer in a moment, but I once saw, there was a book and it said, best way to deal with financial stress. And you open the book and it's all blank, except for on each corner. One corner it said, save more, the other one said, spend less. And that's throughout the book. But nonetheless, how do we deal with financial? Again, I'm going to turn it into what we've been talking about, which is, if you're having financial stress and you're anxious about that's perfectly legitimate, normal, and understandable, and it will actually help you make some changes in your life or figure out how to cope. However, if you begin to catastrophize about that, if you begin to create a what-if syndrome, if you begin to project into the future and begin to see the glass half full, half empty, then you're going to potentially create not only the normal anxiety you had, but go down the road of having more complicated and perhaps more severe anxiety. So again, as we talked, using some of the physical controls that Brittany talked about, or learning how to change some of your thinking, those are the ways in which we can just normalize and change just how we see what we're going through. One last thing, if I'm having financial difficulties and I say, I'm never going to get out of this, I'll never get past this, what's that going to do to my thinking and my anxiety? It's going to raise it. But back to what I said about irrational thought, whenever you hear never, always, should, have to. So if I'm working with somebody, say, I'm never going to be okay financially, I'm not surprised they feel anxious, but I will say to them, take a breath, and let's take a look at your life. There have been times, and basically what I want to help that person get to is a kind of diluted belief about, and an ideal way of having a rational thought about that would be, times are very difficult now. I'm having a really hard time handling things financially, but I've had problems in the past and I've gotten over them. I've got skills and I'm going to be able to use those skills in the future and hopefully get a job. And at some point down the line, my hope and my guess is I won't have those financial worries. And that's a way of sort of diluting it. And all of a sudden the feelings change.
And I would agree. I think that when it comes to basic needs, kind of like stressors, that any way you could ground your energy and your worries through some of those grounding techniques, and even some of the mantras, the self-compassion exercises of may I be well, may I be safe, may I experience abundance, and kind of looking at life that way, it could start to create more options for your mind to think about, hey, how can I be problem and solution oriented? What are my skills? what can I learn during this time? How can I go, what can I educate myself on? There's so many things online. So I think that the more we're able to downregulate also our nervous system, the more we're able to come out of that frozen mode and realize that we have some options.
How to turn off the mind in the middle of the night. I go to the bathroom once at night and can't get back to sleep. My mind starts racing in past and future.
Did I write that question? One thing Brittany talked about, but and didn't mention specifically, but I'm going to jump in and say, is there are some great apps. And the reason I say that is because I do have some of those times that you're describing. And if I don't go right back to sleep, I actually, on my phone, I use Calm. But there's Calm, there's Headspace. There are a number of great apps which, I put in my AirPods and literally I listen to some incredibly calming mindfulness exercise, and within a few minutes, I'm asleep again. So I think they're so available in terms of and really inexpensive. I think Calm is $59 for the year or something. So, and those are just the two that I'm aware of. I'm sure Brittany has some others, but as a really quick way to turn off your mind, plug in and listen to some relaxation or some mindfulness exercise.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree, and I use Insight Timer, so you're we're on the same page. I think that when I hear people have the age-old sleep anxiety questions, two things. I think that there are interventions you could have for the middle of the night, exactly, putting on some relaxation music. Now you have some tools, maybe practicing that 4-count box breathing until you're able to kind of count the sheep and fall asleep. Or they actually do recommend in sleep hygiene practices, which again is trying to create a routine for your sleep, going to bed at similar times, waking up at similar times. But also if you wake up, it's okay to get up, get a glass of water, go back to bed, listen to your app, and fall asleep. As opposed to ruminating there, sitting, having your mind go in many directions. That is one technique that's offered. But I will say overall, when people are having anxiety in the middle of the night, I propose to them, and even with some of our patients, that it's kind of an all day long thing, right, of like learning how to regulate our nervous system. So I recommend, if you are having sleep problems often and your mind is churning a lot, to think about what you're doing to take care of yourself all day long. Maybe start inserting a little bit more exercise or sunlight time or stress reduction. There's a lot of classes out there right now too. You could take some mindfulness-based stress reduction classes. And so maybe it could be something you start to add to your daytime, so that you also have your nervous system kind of unwinds before you go to bed, and you also have tools if you need them in the middle of the night.
And on a more practical level, in addition to all that Brittany said, you need to make sure you're intentional about your life choices.
Yes.
And if you're having trouble sleeping or waking up and ruminating, some simple things are, watch your screen time before you go to sleep. Be careful about what you eat. Don't drink caffeine drinks at, after too long a period of time. Too late a period of time. So there are certain things that you can be intentional about to make sure I'm going to create my environment with as much possibility for me to have a good night's sleep.
And just my own personal experience with this is, and it kind of ties into everything we've already talked about tonight, when I wake up, and I know I've got to get up in a few hours, the first thing my mind says, oh no, I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep. And you have to kind of recognize, wait a minute, I'm not going to accept that, and that's where mindfulness then has a chance. But if you just nurture that thought, oh no, now I'm not going to be able to sleep, and then I'm going to be tired, and I'm going to have a headache, then you never get to the point where you give yourself an option that, no, that's not the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing. I thought When I was a kid, we had these woven finger handcuffs. And
Yeah.
the harder you tried to get out of them, the tighter they became. And the only way you were able to get out of them was you stopped trying to get out and you loosened up, and then they slipped off. And in a way, that's kind of what I'm dealing with anxiety, these ruminating anxieties about. The harder you try to pull out of it, the more you're fueling it. And the mindfulness exercises and the calm apps and the thinking changes allow you to say, let me look at it differently. Let me just let go instead of struggling to get out. And before you know it, the feeling goes away.
When a family loses their jobs, how do I give them encouragement without making them feel like a failure? I feel sorry for our panel tonight. These are tough questions.
Yeah.
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, one more time.
When a family member loses a job,
How can you encourage them without making them feel like they're a failure?
well, first off, I think, I think the main issue is communicating without judgment. I'll go back again to listen so people will talk, and talk so people will listen. And the second part of that question is really what threw me, is like, I think you have to be real careful about why you'd try, just be mindful of the kinds of things you would say that would make somebody feel judged and feel like they made a mistake and feel somehow bad about what they did. And I guess the main thing is listening to how someone feels and validating their feelings. You have to be willing to be there, non-judgmentally, hear them, and be a caring person for them. And one last thing, and then I'll turn it over to Brittany. When somebody's telling you, if someone's telling you about those concerns they have, unless they're specifically asking you for advice, don't give advice, because help not asked for is criticism. And if somebody comes to you with their pain and you start telling them what they should do, then they begin to feel like either depressed or angry at you, or depressed that they're somehow doing the wrong thing. So mostly when people want to talk to you, it's listen non-judgmentally, and they'll find a way out. They'll find a way out of it.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I think that you can also not be afraid to just take the lead from your family member and just let them know that you're there, and to acknowledge yourself as a safe person if they need to have anybody to talk to at any point, that you could acknowledge that you could be there for them as, non-judgmentally, and to help them with whatever they may need, and that may change over time, what they need.
And that also kind of goes for a lot of other things too. There's a lot of times we will avoid interacting with someone who's had a loss because we don't know what to say. And it's not really important what we say. It's letting them, as Dr. Gelbart say, having a chance for them to say. My home is filled with stress and anxiety. How can I move on and think positive when everyone else is negative and fills the home with so much unhappiness?
I guess I'll start on that one. I think something I had read somewhere was it was actually about relationships and cultivating positive relationships in the home. And one thing that they mentioned was actually just being mindful of positive communication and starting to, I think you could really be the light by starting the trend. Even if you're the only one in the home, it's amazing what bleeds off on people when you start to, practice your own skills, but I think that one way is just to practice your word and the way that you communicate with others. And, we are really only in control of our behaviors, but I think we could be good examples. And that would be my one takeaway, is to look at how you're communicating with your family members and to increase positive communication, because that could also be contagious.
And for people that have kids at home, I'm just such a big believer. Our kids don't learn what we teach them. Our kids learn what they watch us do. So if we can model positive mindfulness, they're going to be ahead of the kids that never get a chance to see that in their home. Are mood swings a part of anxiety?
You know, in the traditional way, I mean, not really. I mean, mood swings are, for the most part, related to mood disorder rather than an anxiety disorder. Having said that, when people experience severe anxiety, their mood will fluctuate, and they will certainly have fears and get depressed, if perhaps because of the inability to do something, or because they begin to judge themselves and feel there's something wrong with them. So, you know, it's probably a component, but it's not a direct symptom of anxiety.
And I would say too, I think the word mood swings, sometimes people mean different things by it. I think are they like highs and lows, or is it more someone is, you know, like Dr. Gelbart said, is it the stress, or is it more like how is it manifesting and what is it looking like? I think it's important to just clarify what the symptoms and the problems are.
And I know my experience in primary care is when we think of depression, women often are tearful and sad and are more vocal about that. But the men that I see with depression will often present with irritability because they just don't handle it in the same way. So I would agree with Dr. Gelbart. I don't see that so much with anxiety as I would with depression. What should I do if I feel driven day and night listening to nonstop news or coverage about COVID, disasters, and calamities that make me very anxious?
Turn off the radio, turn off the TV and the radio.
That was our easiest question.
That's our easiest question.
We're like, okay, got it.
But it's not, but you know, and although we're making fun of it, it's amazing, and including myself, especially during certain times of this past year, I've never watched more news in my life. And so, and each time it does have this impact. But if it really starts feeling strange or weird, or you start feeling anxious, you know, turn off the news, turn off TV. You know, quiet time. I was just reading this morning. Turning off TV and having a little bit of quiet time actually has, Dr. Miller might know, significant positive impact on your blood pressure.
Absolutely. Well, I know I learned when I shut off the radio and the TV, all the amazing podcasts that are out there on interesting things that I didn't take time to listen to because I was too busy doing those other things. Really, you do need to get away from it. You can't be bombarded continually and be able to fight back at that all the time.
Yeah, I would agree. And maybe I think one exciting thing again is that there's so much education available online these days and interesting workshops and classes. I just took a class from New York this past weekend, and you know, there's so many options out there. So I think education could be another option, learning something. And also I think that right now another cool thing to do is to try new hobbies or reflect, journal, self-reflect during this kind of in-between time about what's important to you and what you want to do moving forward. So there's a lot you could do with your time.
And I'll say one more thing for those that are parents out there. Make sure, you know, really make sure you're monitoring your children, especially depending on their age, don't have the same ability to understand the news as perhaps you do. And so if they're getting saturated with all of this negativity, then that's very possibly going to help lead to some anxiety for them.
I think that's a great point. How do I handle feeling lonely and anxious if I'm isolated?
I think I could talk to some of this because I do work with our cancer community and run support groups and meet with patients on Zoom and stuff. So I do meet with a lot of people that live alone and are dealing with an illness during this time. So people have a lot of different things going on. I think that our support groups, believe it or not, have been highly successful. I know that that's, just for one population, but there's so many things going on right now to connect people, whether it's an emotional support group or, again, churches are going online or different classes, getting creative with ways that you could connect. We are blessed to have technology in this day and age. I know it's not quite the same, but I think there are ways of trying to safely connect. But I think the feeling of loneliness that I wanted to comment about on this question is that actually a lot of these mindfulness-based techniques are very helpful, particularly the one about common humanity and self-compassion, realizing and really checking in with ourselves for whatever it is that's stressing us and letting ourselves know that we are not alone. Connection is the antidote to isolation. So whether it's connecting with others, connecting with ourselves, I think any way you could find connection in your life. I know that it's extra hard right now with COVID and all the barriers, but finding ways of safely connecting. Social connections help regulate us as well. Yeah.
How can we help a teenager regain her motivation and self-worth?
I'm chuckling. I mean, it's such a vast question. I guess the first part of that I would say is go back again to dialogue and discussion and find out, you're going to have to dig and find out what is underneath, what is happening in that child's life, in terms of stressors, what are the thoughts about what's happening to that child, and begin there. And because, before you can, just like in any form of healthcare, Dr. Miller can't prescribe a treatment until she finds out what's wrong with the person. So the first step is, I don't mean in a clinical way, but diagnosing, finding out from your child what they're struggling with. And then from there, it takes whatever path it has to take.
And I think that's an excellent point. A lot of times when we don't know how to do these things, it's because we just don't really understand what the problem is. Mm-hmm. And letting the person enlighten us, sometimes that creates the whole dialogue that you need to have.
Exactly.
Sometimes holding space for another person is all they need, or can lead to a big discussion, a good invitation.
So this is going to be the $64,000 question now. What do you do when you have lost multiple family members from COVID, you are unemployed, and now because feeling anxiety, it is affecting and causing marital problems?
That's a painful question, not a painful question, but a painful scenario that some people have to go through. And, I don't want to be, how do I say it? Two things. Find some people you can talk to and that you trust, that are not going to judge you. But, those are pretty severe life stressors and life happenings, and you might benefit from getting some advice professionally if you've gone through all of that. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, but it means that, the level of trauma you've experienced needs to be addressed, or it's possible it will follow you for a long time to come. So it mostly involves talking, but primarily finding a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist to talk those things through and make sure you're on the right track, at least.
I just echo the notion. I'm glad that did come up, obviously, on a topic about anxiety, is to be resourceful about and to reduce the stigma of seeking professional help. That is essentially important. And, hopefully today you just realize there's a lot of different skills and techniques, and demystified a little bit of the, what is anxiety. So now we learned a little bit about what it is, and also that it could be treated and that there's hope. And so I think that if you try some of these, if some people tried some of these interventions on their own and it's still not enough, there is absolutely no shame in getting professional help, and that would be my my advice for sure.
And I know a lot of patients will say, well, what can a counselor do? Well, that's right, the counselor's not
Yeah.
going to fix your problems, but it all comes back to how you frame what you're dealing with. And if they can just help you in that reframing, then sometimes that opens your mind to say, well, you know, maybe this is the opportunity. So it's all about how you react to the stress and how you frame the stress.
Exactly.
I think I had, okay, this is a question about OCD. Since the quarantine, my family member that has OCD has gotten much worse.
I think that makes sense. You know, there's a lot of reasons why that would happen. I think it's interesting because a lot of I'm noticing in some of these questions they're about concerns obviously for family members, and so I think on this one I kind of echo the statement I just made too, of knowing the resources that are out there, and kind of also what Dr. Gelbart was saying about just being that non-judgmental space for acknowledging yourself as a safe person. If they do need someone to talk to, it's a very sensitive
Right.
topic to address with someone, but I just, yeah, I'll throw it off to Dr.
Well,
Gelbart.
I'll give one other part of
Yeah.
that, it's not surprising.
Yeah.
And one reason it's not surprising, OCD in particular, and much of anxiety is not a very good one, but a response to feeling out of control. And so people who have OCD are really trying to control their lives because they're feeling out of control. And they find this thing like, I'll wash my hands 100 times. And they can do that. But with the pandemic, with the last year, with all the uncertainty, with all the unknown, our feelings of lack of control has risen tremendously. So if you've got some OCD diagnosis or problem, I'd be surprised if it didn't increase tremendously, because that person is feeling, whether they're aware of it or not, whether it's conscious or not, much more out of control and fearful of the future. And their way of coping with that is to, dive into what their particular compulsive behavior is and do more of it.
So we've come to the end of our questions tonight. I'm just going to close with a final thought. I always am intrigued by nursery rhymes, because where did they come from? And they usually always teach us something about human nature that's been there for years and years and years. And with this whole COVID experience, I just kept thinking about the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And Little Chicken Little just thought it was the end of everything. And that's where, as humans or as people, we can get caught into that, the sky is falling, and then we lose track of, wait a minute, we can step back and reframe that. So they knew what they were writing about when they wrote the nursery rhymes. So thank you for joining us tonight. I hope that, that there was one thing that you could take from this that you might be able to help you address something, and then it's something that you just build on. These are techniques that you can start with, and then you build on them, and it's what you can do then over time. And as Dr. Gelbart said, sometimes you can't solve this alone, but there are some very, very good professionals that can then give you some other tools. So it ends up not being as hopeless or as a worrisome a problem as it looks like it might be. So thanks again for joining us, and go forward. We're heading for a new world. It's going to change.
Good night.
Night.